Do you want this helmet, or how about this brand new one-up chain guide? All three of these items are brand new. All you got to do is subscribe and you will be entered for a chance to win one of these three items. So once again, thanks for your time. This is a way for me to show appreciation, and yeah, on to the video. What is up, guys? We are talking today about why Commencal bikes within the cycling industry is a completely one-off anomaly. This is going to be fun to talk about. I find this stuff really interesting. How it happened, why it happened, and I guess first, what it is that I'm actually talking about when I say that. So I have to start off by saying that it might come as a surprise for the downhill loyalists out there, but when it comes to the big companies, Specialized, Trek, Giant, they could not care less about selling downhill bikes. It's not that they have a bias against downhill bikes, but I would guess, if I had to, that they probably sell one downhill bike for every 3,000 plus other bikes. And by other bikes, I mean everything from road bikes, trail bikes, XC bikes, hardtail, commuter. Downhill bikes represent such a tiny part of their business. It wouldn't actually surprise me if they barely actually turn a profit on them, because typically you need a certain degree of volume for it to actually make money. So it would not be surprising to me if many of these companies, their downhill bikes barely break even. I would guess that Specialized makes 100x just on their tarmac road line than they do on their downhill bikes. Literally just the line of tarmacs from the entry level to the top end. I would guess it probably makes 100x the revenue that their downhill bikes do. And you can kind of tell this when you go onto these sites and see their downhill bikes. They either have one or two builds available. That's it. And it's pretty clearly not a priority. Well, this is where we get into the stroke of genius that Commencal, and especially Max Commencal, as the rest of the industry, with, I would say, perhaps YT being the one exception. They do focus on their downhill bike, but with very few exceptions, the majority of the industry moving away from focusing on downhill bikes, Max Commencal decided to double down, triple down, even quadruple down on their downhill bikes. And this is where we get into why Commencal is such a unique company. I have never seen a company dominate a category the way Commencal has with downhill bikes. I mean, literally, no matter where you turn, if it is gravity related, Commencal dominates, and in particular, downhill bikes. If you go to races or watch race recaps, and I'm not necessarily talking about the World Cup, even though they do have a huge presence there as well. I'm talking about smaller national series races, grassroots races, just showing up at a bike park. It literally looks like for every 10 bikes, 5 of them are Commencal. And this is not by accident, and I am going to talk about how it happened and why it is such a cool example of a company sort of taking advantage of a opening in the market. In one look at Commencal's website, this strategy becomes abundantly clear. 95% of rider preferences they have covered. Fox, Öhlins, and RockShox. They are pretty much the only company, with perhaps the exception of YT, that offers this kind of customization. They know that typically the person that is buying a $5,000+ downhill bike is kind of a bike nerd, knows what they want. I, myself, for example, prefer RockShox. You could give me any option and I am going to go with RockShox. Many of you listening might go the way of Fox every time, no questions asked, or Öhlins. Well, Commencal is one of the few companies to understand who their customers are, to appreciate the value of offering this level of choice, especially when the rest of the industry has pretty much moved away from it. Example of how Commencal created this just astonishing level of domination in downhill bike. I can't sort of reiterate this enough. I've never seen it, and it's funny because for many of you that are newer to the sport, you won't realize that this was not always the case. This is a good example of one of the common sort of, in my opinion, myths that many people will reiterate, is that racing does not lead to bike sales. This is a very common theory that people have, that winning World Cup races does not make a difference in terms of bike sales. Well, tell that to Commencal. This sudden increase in kind of market share domination happened in near lockstep with one Amaury Pierron winning 2 World Cup overall titles. And so I would say Commencal is probably the most sort of obvious example of, yes, racing and especially winning races and especially titles absolutely helps sell bikes. And a great example of this is when I got into road cycling, I went, well, who was the best road bike? Well, I got an idea. Who won the Tour de France that year? Whoever. Jonas Vingegaard, Tadej Pogacar. What bike they ride? Oh, Colnago, Cervelo, boom. Right? I mean, that's literally how I went about it. And I can tell you there are thousands and tens of thousands of people getting into the sport that have done the exact same thing. And so this reoccurring theory that people suggest that racing doesn't help sell product and it really isn't worth it. And it kind of always makes me chuckle because it's like, I guess they just assume that whether it's MotoGP or Supercross or XC Road, I guess they think companies are in the habit of just throwing millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. When you look at race budgets throughout the world, just on 2 wheels, it's in the hundreds of millions. I guess they think they just do it for the sheer fun of it because it's like, it doesn't really make sense. Yes, this stuff makes a difference. Commencal is probably the best, most notable example of a company that went from, I wouldn't say irrelevant, but kind of irrelevant, to now absolutely, unquestionably dominating the gravity segment in the way I've never seen it. And if you don't think Amaury Pierron's World Cup overall titles played a role, I don't know what to tell you, because it's so obvious that you can literally look at it, the timeline, and yeah, he just cemented that connection. So on to another thing that Commencal did right is because they do sell a lot of downhill bikes, they take almost the opposite approach of a Specialized and a Trek. A lot of these companies, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but they do not update their downhill bikes very often. It will be 3-4 years before they make essentially any change. Well, Commencal, they are constantly, almost on a year-by-year basis, updating their bike. I have not seen another company update and work on improving their downhill bikes that are available to the public more often than Commencal. They are not the company like, for example, Loic Bruni that I did a video on that is pretty much, they don't care about selling downhill bikes, and so they take the opposite approach. They kind of infrequently update their bikes. Well, Commencal knows that the serious riders and racers are buying their bikes, and seeing the development and the testing on the World Cup side with Amaury Pierron, with Miriam Nicole, seeing that incorporated into their bikes and then have that bike available for purchase is once again winning over the sort of the serious mountain bikers. And that is Commencal's bread and butter, is those serious gravity riders. This is a company that is kind of bored and bred for gravity mountain biking. This is not, they don't sell cross-country bikes, or do they sell? Even if they sell cross-country bikes, not many people buying a Commencal is buying it for their cross-country intention. Or they also don't sell road bikes. And just for clarity, I love road bikes and I love cross-country bikes, but Commencal is a thoroughbred gravity company, and that is another reason why so many racers resonate with it. So that was a long rant as to why, in my opinion, Commencal is dominating downhill racing and dominating downhill bike sales. Also, I want to mention, I'm not talking about like a small builder. So Frameworks, for example. I'm not talking about like a small builder that makes a couple hundred frames, many of which are downhill bikes. I'm talking about like large international companies. So I forgot to mention that in the beginning. Let me know if any of you guys watching have it. What's your opinion? Agree, disagree? I love hearing your insight. I know you guys are as passionate as I am. So anyways, leave me a comment and hope you enjoyed the video.